Welcome back once again. We've got ourselves some Monday Night Football. We've got the Colts. We got the Ravens. We got Viper Bytes, and we're going to break it all down for you right here so you are ready. Maybe even help you with your DFS lineup. I'm not a big DFS guy, but maybe some of these numbers and facts I'm going to drop on you will help you make a decision here. Now, the Ravens are 7-point favorites in this game. The over-under is set at 45.5. That may be a little bit high for me right now, but we'll see. We'll see as I talk through this if I change my mind on what I'm going to use as a score. Now, when we take a look at the injuries, we're going to start with the Colts side. We're going to make our way over to the Ravens here as well. But where do you start with the Colts? They've been suffering injuries all along that offensive front. You know, Quentin Nelson, he's dealing with some stuff. Brandon Smith, he's been dealing with some stuff. Carson Wentz has been playing on he's basically been like Monty Python here. It's just a flesh wound. He's been playing with some bad ankles, bad knees, probably a bad back, probably a little bit of a, you know what, he's probably seeing defensive linemen in his sleep each and every night. T.Y. Hilton, he looks like he's probably going to be out again this week. Paris Campbell, when is he not hurt? So the weapons haven't been there for Carson Wentz. Now, when we take a look at Carson Wentz, he's 88 for 138 on the season with a 63.8 completion percentage. He's thrown for 920 yards through 4 games with 5 touchdowns and 1 interception. He is currently the quarterback 22 with 62.6 fantasy points. Last week, Carson Wentz had his best game by far as a Colt. He's sitting at about 7.1 yards per attempt. He was completing about 75% of his passes, but still, he could not muster more than 20 fantasy points. And here's some bad news. It's bad enough that he's got 2 bad ankles and he can't move and protect himself, but now he gets to go against the Ravens defense that is blitzing at a 32.8% rate. Does that mean, that means that there's someone coming once every 3 snaps. There's someone coming on a blitz. And did I mention that this Colts line is not right now? Brandon Smith, I mentioned his injuries. I mentioned Quentin Nelson and what he's dealing with. This all adds up to be not a good night for Carson Wentz. Oh, boy. Now, when we talk about who he's throwing to, he hasn't had T.Y. Hilton at all this season. And yet, T.Y. Hilton, despite not playing a single game this year, he only has 5 less receptions and 55 fewer yards than Paris Campbell. Sorry, I probably shouldn't be taking a shot at Paris Campbell. Then again, he probably can't catch what I'm saying anyway. And back to the wide receivers that Carson Wentz does have at his disposal. Michael Pittman is the type of wide receiver I thought was going to have a huge year with Carson Wentz. 6'4", 223, big target, plenty of security. Unfortunately, that security option hasn't been in the end zone. At least not one that has paid off yet. Michael Pittman, surprisingly, has 0. That's right, 0. Same amount of touchdowns as T.Y. Hilton this season, despite being 17th in the league amongst wide receivers and targets with 36 through 4 games. He's also hauled in 23 of those targets for 279 yards, which puts him 22nd in the league. Now, the last 3 games in particular, he has a 31% target share to go along with 6+ catches, 55+ yards, 8+ targets, and at least 11 fantasy points in each of those 3 previous games. The opportunities are there, especially with T.Y. Hilton missing the first 4 games and with Paris Campbell being a non-factor in 3 of those games. Now, the other receiver that we could talk about here for the Colts is Zach Pascal, who is the wide receiver 35 early on in the 2021 fantasy campaign with 48.6 fantasy points on the strength of 3 receiving touchdowns, which took place in the first 2 weeks of the season. In the first 4 games, Pascal's had games of 43 yards, 38 yards, 41 yards, and 44 receiving yards. Not good. Not a guy that you can rely on a whole lot. He's been getting those touchdowns, but like I said, those were in the first 2 weeks. He only has 15 receptions for 156 yards. That's not going to get a cut. They need another option there in the passing game. Something's got to go. It can't just be Michael Pittman. Zach Pascal's got to get himself open a little bit more because, like I mentioned, Paris Campbell hasn't been there. T.Y. Hilton's not ready to come back yet. The other receiver they've got, so to speak, in there has been Nyheim Hines, the running back, who has been a good addition to your weekly flex spot. Currently, he is sitting at the RB34 in PPR scoring and has put together a nice little stat line himself. especially when it comes to the receiving game. He's the Colts' third leading receiver with 14 catches on 18 targets for 124 yards and has added a rushing touchdown on one of his 18 carries. In a game I expect the Colts to be trailing in, I'd expect more Hines involvement. Looking at the Ravens' pass defense, or defense in general, they are giving up 6.5 receptions per game to go along with 54.8 receiving yards per game to opposing running backs. This game script and what Nyheim Hines does and what this Ravens defense does, it screams to me that this could be one of those Nyheim Hines kind of games where we're like, oh man, Jonathan Taylor, if only you could. Now, speaking of Jonathan Taylor, everyone knows that I have been freaking out for weeks when it comes to Jonathan Taylor. Even last season, we saw him start off slow, but eventually he got it going. He was able to capitalize on opportunities that he hasn't been able to do so over the season yet. So far, he is the RB20 and has yet to add more than 51% of the snaps. Marlon Mack is still getting, last week, I just mentioned 51% of the snaps to Jonathan Taylor last week. Marlon Mack still got 10 snaps. When is Marlon Mack not going to be a thing in Indianapolis? He's actually taking some snaps away from Nyheim Hines that they could really be using. Now, I know last week they played with the lead a little bit against the Dolphins, but still, Jonathan Taylor needs more than 51% of the snaps to be successful. Now, when we take a bigger deep in here, he's got 52.5 fantasy points, one touchdown in those 4 games, one touchdown in 69 touches. He's had opportunities inside the 10. He's had opportunities inside the 5. He's not getting the job done. 58 carries, 274 yards, 1 touchdown. Sure, 4.7 yards per carry is nice. The volume is there. We just need the production. We need those touchdowns. He's also getting 3 targets per game and recorded 11 receptions on 81 yards in the passing game. Now, the tight end position, this is about as ugly as you could possibly get. You got Jack Doyle. He's coming in at fantasy tight end 26. Mo Alley Cox coming in at fantasy tight end 24. Last week, it was a Mo Alley week. He's scoring touchdowns. He got 2 of them against the Dolphins on 3 receptions. He added 42 yards. But outside of that game, he's done nothing. He's been quiet. 3 receptions and 32 yards in the first 3 games. Jack Doyle hasn't done much better. You know, if you look at him, he's got 10 receptions, 119 yards this season, with over half of that production taking place back in week 2 against the Rams, where he had 5 receptions for 64 yards. So we can put a lot of blame on Carson Wentz, but he's not getting a whole heck of a lot of help from the rest of his Colts teammates there. Even Jonathan Taylor, we were expecting much. A lot of us drafted him back into the first, early second. We're not getting those dividends aren't paying off as of yet. Really making 0 RB truthers look pretty good right now. Now, when we flip over to the Ravens, I mentioned that, man, this is their game to lose right now. But it's the NFL. Anything can happen on any given Monday. And when we look at the injuries, Ronnie Stanley, we know his issues. Alejandro Villanueva, his issues. Deshaun Elliott hasn't been practicing because of his quad that he's been dealing with. So when we look at it, this is basically Lamar Jackson. He's been a one-man band kind of thing. Passing the ball, running the ball. I'm sure if he could, he'd try and throw himself the ball too. I'm waiting for him to have some receiving yards that he's actually throwing the passes to himself. It's coming. It's eventually going to happen. We know it. Now, heading into this contest, Lamar Jackson is the QB9. Keep in mind, I'm recording this on the Friday, so things can change over the weekend. But going into week 5, he is the QB9 with 91.98 points and doing this with his legs, averaging 6.6 yards per carry, leading that Ravens rushing attack with 279 yards in 4 games. He is also 13th in the league in passing yards with 1,077. And his ADOT so far has been unreal. This is not the Lamar Jackson of last season. This is not the Lamar Jackson of 2 years ago. He is really putting some air under the ball. As a passer, Jackson is 75 of 124, has completed 60.5% of his passes. But here's the thing. Why is he QB9? Because he's got 4 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. He's added 2 touchdowns on the ground, so if you want, we could bump that up to 6 and 3 interceptions. But we're not getting the touchdowns. We're not seeing those big numbers that we're expecting Lamar Jackson to get. Now, Early on in the season, Jackson is attempting 7-point yards each time he throws the ball and has improved his passing yardage each of the last 4 contests. You look at week 1 to week 2, there's an increase. Week 2 to 3, he increased it again. Week 3 to 4, he hit 317 yards against the Broncos. So we've seen each and every week those passing numbers go up, go up, go up. And guess what? He's getting a weapon coming back here soon, real soon, possibly even this weekend, possibly even Monday night. We're waiting on Rashad Bateman, who we'll talk about here shortly. If he can find a way to get the ball in the end zone, he could be the overall QB1. But that 3.2 touchdown rate has limited his ceiling so far. And he has yet to record multiple touchdowns in the passing game at any point of the season. Now, luckily for him, the Colts have given up multiple touchdowns in the pass game in each game so far this season, and they've given up 11 passing touchdowns total. Now, who is he looking for? We know who Lamar Jackson's been looking for. We mentioned that Lamar Jackson is throwing that ball out. We know he's getting the ball deep down the field. He's been and the beneficiary of all that is Marquise Hollywood Brown. Brown has seen 28 targets and hauled in 19 of those for 326 yards. And he probably could have more if it wasn't for week 3 when he dropped a couple big plays. But you know what? He rebounded in week 3. He rebounded in week 4 with 4 catches and 91 yards. Now, despite the said drops, Brown is still 11th in receiving yards this year and finds himself as a top fantasy option amongst wide receivers, 51.1 points. That puts him at wide receiver 13. Now, Brown has been a bit of an impressive run of late. If you include the playoffs, we go back a little while here. He has had 85 or more receiving yards in 11 of his last 12 games. Oh, and this week, the way Jackson has been letting the ball rip down in big play potential, you can expect 15 yards per reception number that the Colts are already surrendering. You can expect that number to increase. Now, another option that Lamar Jackson's had in the passing game has been that of Sammy Watkins. I still stand by the highly analytical metric of never Sammy. But Sammy did have a good week 1 against the Raiders. We call that week 1 wonder Watkins. Week 1 wonder Watkins. Week 1 wonder. Yeah, you know what? I can't even do that. 4 catches, 96 yards. Since then, he's seen exactly 7 targets in each of the last 3 games. He's recorded exactly 4 receptions in each of those games. You have to love his consistency, but he's recorded 44 yards, 68 yards, 49 yards in those contests. So I'd expect, you know what? I don't think I'm going on a limb here. I'm expecting 4 more receptions. I'm expecting 4 more targets. And let's call it 50 yards for Watkins this week. Unless Rashad Bateman's in that lineup. Now, we're hoping that he's making his NFL regular season debut. This Bateman slot immediately into that number 2 role behind Marquise Brown. Full disclosure, it won't be long until Bateman's number 1 wide receiver in Baltimore, in my opinion. Now, currently Watkins and Brown are seeing a majority of the routes. Both ran 30 last week, while James Proche and Devin Duvernay saw 18 and 17 routes respectively. The Colts have been in the middle of the pack as far as fantasy points per game given up to wide receivers, allowing 39.2 per contest. The run game outside of Lamar Jackson, Latavius Murray seems to have supplanted Tyson Williams as the lead back with the Ravens running back committee in the 4 games. Murray has attempted 44 carries, but has only managed 151 yards. That's 3.4 yards per carry. The Ravens have scored 6 rushing touchdowns this season, 2 to Jackson, 1 to Tyson Williams. And despite his inefficiency, Latavius Murray has produced 3 of those rushing touchdowns. Even with those 3 TDs, Murray is still an RB3 at best. He's coming in at RB37 on the season with 33.1 fantasy points. Now, we talk about who's next, who's going to be inactive, who's going to be active for the Ravens. Tyson Williams, Devontae Freeman, Le'Veon Bell. Williams leads all non-Ravens quarterbacks in rushing with 27 carries, 164 yards, and that 6.1 yards per average. But he was the healthy scratch last week in favor of the aforementioned there, Latavius Murray, Devontae Freeman, and Le'Veon Bell even got in on some action there. Freeman has been active for 3 games. He's averaging 6.8 yards per carry, but he's only got 6 carries, and he's only got 41 yards. Bell made his debut last week, 4 carries, 11 yards. What happens? And here's the question. Here's the question we need to be asking ourselves. Sure, Lamar Jackson has produced in the run game. If Tyson Williams is not there, not producing the run game, and you're relying on Latavius Murray, Devonta Freeman, and Le'Veon Bell this week, what happens if the Ravens are short of 100 yards rushing? Will they risk putting Lamar Jackson taking another hit? Lamar Jackson's been hit. We just saw Russell Wilson is one of the most hit quarterbacks over the last few years. He's now dealing with that finger injury there from Thursday Night Football. Can the Ravens really risk an unnecessary hit to Lamar Jackson? I don't know. That's not for me to answer. Now, as far as another option in the passing game, the Ravens have 3 pass catchers this year with at least 25 targets, 16 receptions, and 250 plus receiving yards. We've talked about Marquise Brown. We talked about Sammy Watkins. The third of this group is Mark Andrews, who has only 18 receptions, but he's got those 25 targets. He's got 253 yards. That is good enough to be tight end 9 with 43.3 fantasy points early on in this tight end wasteland. Now, Andrews and George Kittle are the only tight ends inside the top 19 amongst that position that have yet to score this season. Andrews has scored at 8.5% of his targets, 20 of 236 through 3 seasons. So he's bound to erupt. We've seen him score touchdowns. That has been his bread and butter early on in his career. Sadly, we haven't seen it yet. I don't know if him and Lamar are getting on the right page, but like I said, Lamar's only got 4 passing touchdowns this year. Now, last week, good news for Mark Andrews, good news for Lamar Jackson. Mike Gesicki found the end zone against these Colts. And, when we talk about how barren this tight end position is, just for reference, Max Williams is a tight end 13 with 38.9 fantasy points. The 13th best tight end right now would be the 55th ranked wide receiver. Now, we look at this matchup here right now. We've got, like I said, the Ravens, Colts, 2 teams trending in 2 opposite directions. You got the banged up Colts there that have to rely on the run game. They got to rely on Jonathan Taylor. They got to rely on Nyheim Hines. They got to hope that some kind of connection between Carson Wentz and Michael Pittman's there. They got to hope that offensive line can sustain the pressure that they're going to face from this Ravens defense. We know the Ravens are going to blitz, and they might even blitz more than that 33% that I mentioned earlier, knowing that Carson Wentz can't move around in that pocket, knowing that this offensive line can't protect him. With that all said, you've got the Ravens here that are trying to find themselves a run game. They really are. They're trying to find who that lead back is. They think it's going to be Latavius Murray, but they've also been, you lose Gus Edwards, you lose J.K. Dobbins for the season, and now you went with Tyson Williams. You brought in Latavius Murray. You pulled Devonta Freeman off the streets. You pulled in Le'Veon Bell off the streets. They're trying to find some kind of spark to get that run game going, a run game that's been one of the best in the league for a few years now. The other thing I want to see here, the Ravens, are they going to really get this passing game going? It's one of those games where the game script is going to basically say the Ravens are going to be up. They're going to be up big. I think this game is probably going to be a 34-14 type game. I think the Ravens are going to run away with this one. But will they let Lamar throw the ball? Will they try and get this offense going? Will they get the passing game going? If Rashad Bateman's in it, I'm excited to see what he can do out there. Can Rashad Bateman take over that number 1 or number 2 role in the passing game? What happens? Can Mark Andrews get in the end zone? I think the answer to all these questions is yes, yes, and yes. I think Mark Andrews is going to finally find the end zone. I think if Rashad Bateman is healthy, he will be the wide receiver 2 on this team easily. Because Sammy Watkins is a real analytical metric, and you need to really be listening to that. With that all said, this is Viper Bytes. This is Monday Night Football Week 5 preview. And you know what? Make sure you head over Wednesdays, 10 p.m. Eastern. Catch the Vipercast. Myself and Major and Cal and Tara, we all get together. We break down the week that was. We'll be previewing week 6 next Wednesday. So make sure you are ready for that. And we're going to bring the heat like we do each and every week and have a little bit of fun along the way. Also, head over to fantasypoints.com, enter promo code 21Vipers10, get 10% off that subscription. You want stats, you want numbers, you want to make the best decisions for your fantasy football squads. Make sure you're using fantasypoints.com. Until next week, we'll catch you later. Bye.